So this is the Sweatshirt Fitness podcast, and this is my dad, Black Belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He's going to talk about his journey through fitness, how fitness relates to Jiu-Jitsu, his work, and then we're going to break, and you're going to leave for the night. All right, so let's go. Let's go with your high school career, how you got into athletics, and just start from the basics. And this is all going through every sport you went through and how you ended up falling in love with grappling.
So I think for me, when I think about my, we'll call it fitness journey, ever since I was a little kid, Papa, your grandfather, would do this workout every night. And it was the Royal Canadian Air Force workout. Mm-hmm. And he'd sit there and go through the workout, and I would watch him, and, you know, I would go along with him. So my entire childhood, I watched Papa really put an effort into his fitness. So as I got a little bit older, he enrolled me probably late 70s, early 80s. He enrolled Uncle Gary and I in jiu-jitsu, which back then was a term nobody had heard, 70s to 80s. So we took this jiu-jitsu class, right? And self-defense. And I really, really, really enjoyed that journey. One of the reasons that put me into jiu-jitsu is right before that, I had done dance. I did tap, ballet, jazz, hip hop. And again, back in that time frame, I got teased a lot for that because I was doing dance. So, all right, we're going to put you into a little martial art, a little jiu-jitsu. I was game for it, loved it. And it was a lot of grappling, a lot of wrestling, a lot of grappling, a lot of on the floor techniques. So then as I hit junior high school, and I really didn't have time for extracurricular stuff, I wanted to do the school sports. We sat back and went, all right, what's going to transition nicely from that? And wrestling became on the radar. So joined the wrestling team, 7th, did a little camp, end of 6th grade, I wrestled 7th and 8th grade. And it, to me, was an eye-opener, right? Getting out on the mat, man, as I've talked to you about before, as you know, and you're the spotlight, right? You have a team, but at that moment, it's you and the other guy. I thrived on that. I love that. Didn't have a great record, worked hard, did well, had a winning record, but fell in love with it. So that was a seamless transition then into high school wrestling. And when I joined the high school wrestling team, we had a lot of camps, Penn State camp, and we can talk about that stuff, but just dove right into high school wrestling and then started to look at other sports primarily as a means on how to keep in shape for wrestling. So joined cross country, eventually did football, all with the goal of how can I get in better shape for wrestling. Cross country for the cardio end of it, so my gas tank would be deep. Football for the explosive end of it and the strength end of it. And that was my journey up into wrestling. Then had a whole bunch of little kids, put that on pause a little bit. And as I became an adult, started looking around for that next phase of what I would do. And of course, went back to my roots from the 70s and 80s. I'm going to hit jiu-jitsu. That's
really interesting. So how has that changed over the course of the 70s through, 2023 now? The sport of jiu-jitsu had a long time to develop between when you did it. We might get involved a little more in your high school training and everything, but the sport of jiu-jitsu specifically evolved from when you did it in the 70s to when you started in 2010, or what year was it? 2009?
Yeah, 2009-ish.
2009?
It's a good question, and I hadn't put much thought into that. So for me, when I look back, and I'll even talk about wrestling, when I look back, they start a lot younger now, and I think there's a lot more science to it now. When I was in, say, high school wrestling, a coach would go, all right, Tuesday's gym room. So you'd go to the gym, and there's weights, and what do? You start pushing them around. There wasn't really anybody to sit there and tell you what to do, so everybody tries to get their max. All right, I'm going to put the most weights on and try to push. So I think they put a lot more science into it in terms of what's beneficial, what's going to work. And then also starting at a much younger age, really getting into body mechanics, body movement, hip placement, where you're supposed to be. And then additionally, techniques. They have added a lot of techniques along the way that I look back and I go, wow, I never saw that before. I just had one my sensei showed us the other day, that I literally went to the guys, all my years of grappling, wrestling, jiu-jitsu, all of it, I've never seen that move before. And to still have that kind of thing coming up, I think the sport is an ever-evolving sport.
I think one of the things is it is more depth than can be really expressed to somebody who hasn't actually participated in it.
Yeah.
Because wrestlers get a very good idea of it, but even still, you're about this deep into the sport of grappling as a whole. So you can get like very deep into wrestling specifically, and then go into jiu-jitsu and it's completely different.
Right.
And then go into sambo and it's very different. And I believe that there's issues with rule sets. The issue with rule sets is it takes away reality to the sport.
Yeah.
But if you're able to do multiple rule sets and then get deep in each rule set, you're going to have a better overall understanding of grappling in general, and then apply to each rule set the different techniques learned from the other rule set. So the problem with rules isn't the fact that they limit you. They just limit you if you limit yourself to one rule set.
Right.
Because in a fight, although everybody goes, in a fight, there's no rules. If you limit yourself purposefully and have certain different goals, and then you give yourself experience within those individual goals, you can then go, well, if I'm not able to take someone down, like in jiu-jitsu, a lot of classes you start from the knees.
Right.
Then you get a certain rule set that's very, very technical, which is on the ground. But wrestling is very, very, very technical on takedowns.
Right.
So how do you think applying the rule set of jiu-jitsu over this 30-year time period has evolved it in a general sense as a sport?
It's funny because when I talk to my sensei, he talks about the origins of his line back in Brazil. And really effectively, they had houses where there were no rules. And basically you got together and, you grappled hard until somebody lost. So there were no rules back there. And then, of course, you transition that here into the States and with IBJJF, and now you start to apply these rules to the sport. And I get that it changes the dynamic of how you might practice that sport. However, when I'm doing jiu-jitsu, I'm always trying to think of it from a realistic self-defense standpoint. How would I apply this in the very unlikely event that there's an altercation, a physical altercation in real life? How am I going to apply this technique? And I remember I went to a Kempo karate place, and we were doing some stuff. I was doing some Kempo, teaching them some jiu-jitsu, and I remember one of the senseis there went, well, there's basically only, like 3 moves in jiu-jitsu? Arm bar, triangle, and Kimura. And I went, well, Danielson, you have a lot to learn.
Well, and then there's the thing about having a lot of depth in one rule set.
Right.
Same deal.
Right. Yeah, 100%. So I'm not sure that I've answered your particular question. However, I do see how the rule set alters the game set of practicing BJJ.
Yeah, I think that overall it's funny to see that application of changing the rule set in jiu-jitsu can expand out into more sports as well, where you talk about people approaching it scientifically, where not only the evolution of a sport due to rule sets, but the artificial evolution of a rule set due to the approach to optimizing your performance within the rule set. So in basketball, they used to think that the ideal player was the average textbook man. And now they actually legitimately, when I read the textbooks, they have specific arm length ratios to body torso sizes for different positions on the court. So it's literally an evolutionary process and something that people are trying to really force training to optimize. So, someone like you, and this is where, I always am trying to get you to work out just a little bit more, a little bit different, a little bit that, and, you do pull-ups now. Evens it out a little bit from the push-ups. And even just that is 100% difference in a better direction. And then we have these people eking out half a percentage point better to win on that, that highest level.
Right. And again, I think that's where application of scientific principles has come into a lot of these fields in terms of how do we improve the physical ability of a certain individual. And back in the day, we had none of that. Even what you do, I watch how you have spreadsheets and numbers. And man, if I had that back in high school wrestling, I think I would have eaten that up, and I would have definitely improved my overall game.
Well, and I think that the issue in modern day is we have a population of people. If we're just going to take this out to regular populations, because jiu-jitsu right now is the martial art that everyone's going into. Karate was big in the 70s. You got the karate movies, 80s, 90s, that time period. And you've got Bruce Lee, Jeet Kune Do. You've got a lot of these other guys promoting karate heavily with the karate movies and kung fu. Now it's all jiu-jitsu. Now it's all grappling based. You've got anime, Baki the Grappler, Kengan Ashura, stuff that you're probably not as familiar with. You're more Enter the Dragon kind of, era of content. But with all of this entertainment coming out surrounding grappling, and then the UFC, and then the entire culture surrounding it, this is the modern day equivalent, and people who are really unprepared to come into a sport where there's such a high level of performance already there, twofold things happen. Some of those people get injured, depending upon the dojo they go into.
Right.
And also, depending upon the dojo they go into, if that dojo is willing to water down, you end up getting a watered down product as well.
Right.
So you have this dichotomy. And the best of the best athletes in the world continue to get better because the population size increases, which automatically means at the farthest end, you're going to get a higher performer in the Olympic sprint, in the highest point of jiu-jitsu.
You're going to get higher highs and lower lows.
Lower lows. And the average is lower lows, but with 10 billion people compared to 6 billion people, you're still going to get a couple 9-second sprinters for that 100. You're still going to get more, 332 mile runners because now you have 100,000 people up at that level. And how do we actually sway the whole population into being able to handle jiu-jitsu without watering down the sport?
Right. I think it's a funny thing. You had mentioned injury, and my mind went to injuries in BJJ. Like, what do I see? How can we avoid that? So backing up a little bit, one of my fellow BJJ practitioners had texted me. He was feeling a little down. He had been beaten by a couple of people at the academy, and he felt that he wasn't doing a good job. And I said to him, I go, look, we're at a premier BJJ academy. So you could either choose to stay at a premier academy and maybe get your butt beat a little bit, or go to a second-rate academy and beat everybody, right? So me, I'd rather be at that premier academy and be pushed and be stretched. In terms of injury, I think a lot of people who are in touch with their body physically have those little red flags that'll pop up that maybe you pay attention to, maybe you don't pay attention. And I think if you are somebody who is already in the sport, you hear the things. They go, okay, this might injure me, or this person might injure me. And you have to pay attention to those flags. Even if you're at an academy that's watered down, you have to pay attention to those flags on how to prevent that injury. I remember one of the things I was thinking about talking about was the worst injury I've had in BJJ, right? So I knew going into this, I had this little red flag. I went, this isn't a good scenario. But in a sense, the person who was running class, they would use me frequently back in the day as a person they call the enforcer. And the enforcer is a guy who might not look imposing. At that time, I was probably blue, purple belt, maybe 142 pounds, middle-aged. And you get these big knuckleheads that would come in and want to rip everybody apart. They go, all right, let's put Little Glenn with him, Little Doc. That's my nickname at the academy. And I beat them. So I did enforce. I go, all right, you're not going to just throw everybody around. So here I was, and there's a white belt. And he's about 255 pounds. And the master at the time, the sensei at the time, said, we're going to do foot to floor, which is stand up, take down. You'd maybe consider it to be wrestling. I'm going to take down to the ground, and then you're going to practice BJJ. So this guy's 250, 255, big, strong guy. I'm going to do foot to floor. And that little red flag in my head went, this is probably not a good scenario for you. And he couldn't take me down, so he got frustrated. He dropped down to one knee, and he took his forearm, and he tried to swipe my right leg out. And I thought it was skin on skin. So I cross-faced him, and as I came around, spun around to his back to get back control, got a tight waist, my leg felt a little funny. And I told him, I go, wait, hold on a second. He goes, what? I go, hold on. I went to stand up, and I fell down like a sack of potatoes. It shattered my leg. So
every time you tell that story, I literally cringe.
well, you were there that day. You were at the academy.
I cringe every time I hear that story, though. You tell it, it's just like...
Man, I tell you that the snap, and I just thought it was a crack of skin on skin. I really did. And that injury set me back months and months that I couldn't train. And you remember that was so painful for me physically, emotionally, spiritually, psychologically. I needed to train. So I was going into the academy every day on crutches with a broken leg, watching people. But I had that red flag right in the back of my head, and I knew this probably wasn't the best scenario for me. So a lot of those injuries are potentially avoidable. And then you have a subset of injuries that no matter what you're going to do, it's going to happen. And I have a couple of those. But
You get stuck sometimes where your body just hits a limit. And that's where it's very avoidable in your own training in the scientific setting where you can see that sort of thing developing. You're sitting there with, a dumbbell. Dumbbell's not, it is a dynamic exercise because dynamic means movement, but it's not the same level of dynamic movement that you get during a sport.
right.
And that sort of unpredictability of it, there's certain predictable factors which can allow us to train you for those factors and increase the ability to handle injury, to recover from injury, and to decrease the likelihood of having that injury happen in the first place.
Right.
But there are just times when tissues hit their limit.
Yeah, and then just things, collisions. I remember I broke 3 ribs. We were doing foot to floor, and a kid just came down on me, and his knee hit my chest and broke 3 ribs. There was nothing I was doing to prevent that. So that wasn't a wear and tear injury. That was just a collision type injury that had zero predictability.
You just break a barrier, and you go from the I get hit to I get bruised to it broke.
Right.
And that is a sliding scale, and
right.
it you have it. And again, maybe you land 1 inch to the right and he grazes you. Maybe you land half an inch to the right and you ate a little more calcium in the past 3 years. It grazes you. Like
Right,
you don't know.
right.
And again, that's something where you do your best, and the people at the elite level did a combination of they were perfect about it, and then the combination of they were a little bit lucky, and then the combination of they're very good.
Right.
So that's where I go. It's very tough. And then it's tough to ensure that people are careful without over babying someone in a sport that is meant to be an intense sport. And then you go, we were just talking about King of the Streets, where you originally watched UFC, and it was pretty brutal.
Yep.
And they've toned down. You think about the UFC fights. The rules changed and altered. And, now there's this new one that's online where it's King of the Streets. You don't even see the face of any of the organizers. They're all in these masks. It's set up with generators in abandoned warehouses in the UK. And head stomps are allowed. I've seen people do running jumps into head stomping other guys on concrete.
Yeah.
And that sort of level develops as a response to any sport decreasing, something rises up to fill that space.
Right.
So how do you eliminate the risk? And again, I think there are dojos going both ways. I think our dojo is going the premier way of where letting people compete to develop to be the best in the world. And I think that the issue is I've seen guys come in from other places who aren't ready to handle getting on the mat.
Right.
Including wrestlers from schools that have watered their wrestling program down, including other jiu-jitsu guys who come in and they're expecting to be promoted quickly, or they're expecting something that they're not going to get here. I wrestled all the way up to county level of wrestling, came in, and I've been working my way slowly through the system.
Right.
I didn't come in and within 3 months get a blue belt. I'm 3 years in now, and I'm still a blue belt, and I'm probably not going to be a purple belt for another how many years?
Yeah, and that's the thing that I try to impress. You get white belts in, and I've been there long enough now to see the process where you get 10 people that join, and then within a certain period, there's one of those people left, right? And then of those people that become blue belts, a bunch of them will fall off. So I try to tell everybody, I try to get these white belts, and I say, listen, your only metric of success, your only metric is you versus you. So I've been at the academy where there are people I've been grappling with for 13, 14 years that I've never beat. And there are people grappling 13, 14 years that have never beat me. The only metric I can use is how do I compare against myself from metaphorically yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
It might be last month. It might be last year. It might be 3 years ago. And I have 1 or 2 white belts that are now purple belts that have said to me, man, what kept me going is you telling me that all that matters is if I faced myself today from myself of a month ago, could I kick my own butt? And the answer is yes.
Yeah.
And there's your metric. And that's what you have to use. And look, you're going to have triumphs and failures, and you'll
Yeah.
beat that person that you've never beat before that maybe you'll never beat again.
Yeah.
The question is, how are you against yourself?
There's one day, a day that you're going to lift a weight that you will never be able to lift again.
Yep.
And you don't know which day that is. You don't.
Right.
And that's okay.
Right.
You know, and speaking of, you know, this I don't care about belts. I've said that for a very long time, and I think you've heard me say that a lot.
Well, and I don't think it's lip service. I think you truly
no,
mean it.
I really don't.
Yeah.
And
some
for
people
me,
say it and don't
some
mean
people
it.
say it and don't care. I legitimately don't care. Actually, I get in like 3-4 times a week. I wish I could get in 6. You know, I wish I could get in 7 times a week. But
I get that. I do 5.5 times a week, and I wish I could be there a little bit more.
You're nuts. The biggest thing for me, again, is not getting the belt and not lip service at all. Because if we had wrestling classes that were more often than Thursday, I actually think that I would do more wrestling classes at this point in my journey.
I've said the same thing myself.
Which again, I don't think the wrestling classes would actually push you towards the next belt in the same way that a gi class would.
Right.
And I think that's one of the parts about jiu-jitsu that isn't talked about as much, where there are a lot of guys who are no-gi guys that I think are at least a belt above where they actually are.
Yeah.
And it really is a difference between, you really need to go to a gi day to get your belt, you know, like as a thing. So I think that in this point in my journey, I would be having, if they had more wrestling classes, because I've been hitting a lot of no-gi, but if they had more wrestling classes, I think that I'd be almost at a stopping point rank-wise, but my game would still be increasing in quality because I'd be doing a lot of wrestling. I'd be doing a lot of no-gi. I probably hit about 1 gi a week, which is usually Mondays, and you've been seeing me on Mondays in the gi. And then I usually do Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, which is the no-gi. And if I hit, you know, a weekend day, it's usually Saturday or Sunday, preferably Sunday, because I get longer rolls in.
Yep.
So again, it's really about what is the most real way you can work to get better, and what is your goal,
and making sure that your metric isn't that belt. And I know it sounds easy coming from somebody who got the black belt, and you hear this all the time. My journey starts at black, right? I mean, it doesn't end at black. That's not the end point. That's my starting point.
Yeah.
And I know it sounds corny until you're there, but I mean it. Your metric needs not to be the belt. It needs to be the mirror, you know, when you look in the mirror and fighting yourself. How would you do? I think back, I go, in my jiu-jitsu career, who would be the doc that I would fear facing the most, right? Mm-hmm. And in a weird way, it's not black belt Glenn. It's probably purple belt Glenn. Purple belt Doc was a lot younger, a lot more, you know, aggression. You know, black belt Glenn, I don't want to injure anybody. I don't want to get injured. So I'm kinder with my opponents. Yeah. I catch something and then I'll put my hands up. Hey, I got it, and I release it. Purple belt Glenn goes for the tap. So I look back at my journey.
I still go for the tap, but I always ask people if I've cranked them on a choke.
Right.
So I 100, like for me, I'll go for a tap unless I really think someone's going to hurt something, and then I'll just hold it. So I don't let it go.
Right.
I'm a blue belt. I can't afford to do that.
Neither would I as a blue or purple.
You know, because you can't afford to just say, because then it seems hubristic.
Right.
You know, you hold it in place until the person either realizes they're in a dangerous position, because sometimes people don't realize they're in a dangerous position, but I don't have the rank to be able to just give it up unless I'm willing to give it up and just kind of let it go.
Right.
Because I've done that a couple of times where I give it up and just go, it's not worth the fight, and it's also not worth me trying to say you could have gotten it out this way. Right. You know, gotten out of it this way. That's an instructor's job to handle that, either to notice it during the match or an instructor to, you know, show those situations at their own times.
Yeah.
And it's a tough game to play with that sort of thing, because now that we've added ranking into it, I think it's a good thing in a lot of ways, because it gives people something to be proud of. I'm proud of my blue belt.
Yeah.
I really am. But I'm also, it also isn't the determinant of why I'm there.
No.
And it's very interesting. What were you going into here?
Well, so you were just talking about, you know, injury when you have your opponent and you let stuff go. I think that injury in jiu-jitsu is a 2-part process, right? So when you're just in the gym pushing weights, injury is more of a 1-part process. You have to know your body. In BJJ, when I have a partner, I think it's the obligation of the person who's in the position of being tapped to make sure that they tap, right? So you have something applied, and you know that it's hurting. It's your obligation to tap. But I also think the onus, particularly with a higher level belt,
is on the higher level belt, when you know that you have your partner in a dangerous position, particularly if it's a white belt, blue belt, lower belt, to make sure that you don't allow it to get to that point of injury. So it's a two-part process, which is different than just working out, which is more of a one-part process.
Well, and then my question is, how much of it do you allow beforehand? It becomes this tough gradient to play.
It is.
And you know, it's like you have to have an understanding that you can play harder with a younger guy who's being rough than you can play with a guy who's older coming into it as a white belt who doesn't know either.
Yeah.
So you have to, you know, reprimand their mistakes differently.
Yeah, and I also think that you need to know the particular part of the body that you're working with. So if I have somebody in a choke, and I know it's a choke, I never let go. I make them tap.
You're not going to kill someone in a choke.
I'm not going to hurt you with a choke. Now, if I'm questioning if my angle's wrong and it might be a crank, I might let that go because I don't want to crank somebody's neck. Whereas if I have an ankle or a knee or even an arm or a shoulder, there's a lot less play between, well, this is weird, to this is uncomfortable, to I have to go to the hospital.
And there's different differences between even joints too.
Right. So I remember the sensei I was talking about who put me with that 255-pound guy. I was rolling with him one day and I had him in an ankle lock. And it was more of like a heel hook almost, but I had him in this ankle lock. And he rolled and I didn't let go, and he blamed it on himself. He popped his knee. I mean, he really blew his knee out, and his knee was bad for a long time. MCL, ACL. So after that happened, I became, and I was probably a blue belt at the time maybe, I became a lot more cognizant of, all right, so I have your leg and I know your knee's at risk. I'm gonna grab it, but I'm not gonna go hard on it. I have your neck and I'm in a choke. You're either gonna wind up tapping, getting out of it if you're lucky, you know, if you're fortunate,
or you go out and guess
out.
What? You're not gonna, as long as you're not continuing a choke after someone's out,
right? Which
you're not gonna get hurt.
You feel that release if you have somebody out.
Yeah, it's a fairly safe method. I've gone out. You haven't.
No, I have not. I've come close. I came close the other day. Matt was demonstrating a move on me, and I wanted to let him get it. It was a clock choke, and I wanted to let him get it so the class could see it. And all of a sudden,
mine was actually, I think it was a baseball bat choke.
Yeah, with a higher belt.
No,
from another academy.
Same level belt from another academy.
Yeah.
And he was from Gracie Academy, so I knew he was going to be good. You know. So again, like, it depends upon, if someone says they're coming from another academy that I don't recognize the name of, I'm a little careful. But I recognized Gracie Academy.
Right.
I saw the patch. Lineage. I saw same lineage. I'm like, okay, so this is a guy I'm not going to mess around with. So I went hard. And he was probably a purple belt level blue belt.
Yeah.
So he was on, he probably was a purple belt either very shortly after that or immediately, because he was good.
Right. Which brings back to the point that I was saying before. You can't judge yourself against another belt, right? Only against yourself.
I still remember his name, Matt. I don't remember his last name anymore. Maybe Matt White. No, I remember people's names.
Maybe you lost him. You got passed out.
But again, also, I didn't think I had passed out. I remember
the whole story from your side and the instructor's side.
Yeah.
I heard
what was his side?
You know, so I don't know if you remember the whole thing. He had somebody visiting in who was interested in joining the academy. Oh. It was a young lady, and he said, he goes, well, let's have you watch a little bit of the class. And he knew you'd be a good person to watch. And he goes, let's watch this match. So as they're watching the match, kid catches you. I don't know if he didn't know that he had you, but apparently you're fighting, and then you kind of went out, and he kept the choke going.
I felt myself slipping out of the choke, and then I was gone.
And that's kind of how those chokes go. And he kind of runs over, and you were out, and he kind of sat you up. And here's this poor lady who's looking to join the academy, and he's going, no, this is good. Look, he's gonna take a breath or two. He's gonna recover nicely. He'll do just fine. So hearing that side of it, where it involved a visitor looking at the academy and coming from the outside, seeing that might be a little bit weird, unnerving.
But again, the thing for me is, I go, first of all, it's not my fault, because I was feeling myself slipping out, and apparently it was just one of those ones where it was quick. Yeah. You know, I felt like, oh, I'm slipping out, all of a sudden dark, all of a sudden gone, all of a sudden I'm up.
Yeah.
You know, so it was weird, because it's like, I'm like, oh, it's around my trachea. And then all of a sudden, as I'm slipping out, it gets caught, it shifted, and I was out.
Right.
Because you can go out so quick.
Right. And again, though, neck, choke, you weren't injured. So
It was within 30 seconds of him waking me up, I was back to grappling. And also,
that same kid, right?
Same kid.
Yeah.
I was also cognizant of what he was saying to her. Like, hey, look, he's going to be fine.
So
and
you in that twilight zone.
I heard that and I went, okay, catch your breath, go back into it immediately, because I knew I wasn't hurt.
Yeah.
I'm a little lightheaded. Took a couple breaths, went right back to grappling, because I know that, this is going to be fine long term. Right. I'm not going to sit off on the side and scare someone away when you don't need to recover from that.
And that's what he used you when you went back to grappling. See, he's fine. He went right back to grappling. I don't know who she was, so I'll never know if she joined or didn't join, but
she might have, and I think
you might know who it is.
I might know who it is, but the problem is, first of all, I didn't have my glasses on, and second of all, she was all the way across the room from where I was.
Yeah.
So he was underneath the sign of the logo at the center of the mat, and she was watching the matches towards the front door, and I was towards the front door.
I knew that's where you were. Based on his story, I thought he was on the other side of it, but doesn't matter.
Maybe. I don't know. But from what I remember, he was under the mat and they were standing on the mats.
Yeah.
Maybe they were behind me. I was out.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
I was out, man.
I heard it from both your side and his side.
like I said, I was out, and I didn't think I was. I woke up. The first thing I asked him was, "What? Did I seizure?"
Oh, he told me that. Yeah. He's like, "Did I seizure?" No.
No. You're out. I'm like, "Oh, okay." That was a good one. And again, that's part of going to a good academy is it's a good academy where if someone goes out, they come over to you and they're like, "You're right." It's like, oh, they didn't panic. Okay, so this is a good place to be, because they know the difference between a serious injury and a not serious injury.
Right.
Because you're not injured if you're choked.
Right. And again, back to what we said, depending upon what part of the body you're entangled with, depends upon the outcome.
And and this is one of the big things to look at for the instructors is if you're at an academy where they panic over a choke, you should probably go to a different academy and see how that other academy handles it. Because again, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're teaching bad jiu-jitsu, but if they don't know that that's not an issue, like if they think, oh my gosh, that person's snoring right now, and they think that that's a panic situation, it means that they don't necessarily know how to control their own techniques and what is a truly dangerous situation. You go to somewhere like Sarah, you go to somewhere like a Gracie Academy, and they're going to go, oh, okay, laugh at it a little bit. Been there, we've been in that situation. Because if you truly have had hundreds of students come through, you've seen all the situations to be, nervous about. If I were to be personally coaching people in grappling, I would not know where to start with that. That's why I feel uncomfortable if I'm training a wrestler to try to teach them moves.
Yeah.
I'm not a coach like that. So I know how to get someone to not get hurt exercising for a jiu-jitsu type of situation, right. But I don't feel comfortable teaching someone a technique in that situation.
I get you. And as a blue belt, I didn't either. You had mentioned coaching wrestlers. I know when people come into the academy, pretty quickly I can pick out generally who's a wrestler. Sometimes I'll confuse other athletes. Did you ever wrestle? I go, no, I played lacrosse. I go, okay, I see, whatever. Soccer players,
rugby and football, maybe because they're good with their hips and their feet.
Yeah, balance, coordination, hips. But I personally love coaching wrestlers. We had a friend of yours who came into the academy who wrestled quite a bit through high school and college, very successful wrestler. And when he came into the academy, man, one thing that I loved, I could say to him, very lightly, Joe, shift your hips or whatever, grab over here. And he'd hear me.
That's something that people don't realize is not being able to hear someone while you're out on the mat.
Yeah, I remember, my high school wrestling career. I don't think the entire first year, I don't think I heard anything. I think it was all waterfall. I don't think I heard anything. And then I remember my second year starting to hear the coach. And I was like, oh, wait a minute. He's talking to me. And then being able to implement those things. And I remember by my third year, I was actually talking with my coach while wrestling. Hey, coach, I can't pull off a thing, whatever. So going through that, when I have wrestlers come into the academy, they're easy for me. They're body aware. They got good balance. They have good base.
They have a good understanding, and they hear me.
Yeah, so with that, having wrestlers come in is really good for those reasons because they can hear. I've never talked back to my coach, but I don't know why. And I think that that's something that I should probably try to continue with as I compete more because I'm trying to.
Yeah, well, so talking requires a lot of oxygen, right? So I'm not a big fan of talking while you're grappling. Through my particularly junior and senior year, I was very dominant in the league. So I had a lot of matches where I might be winning 12-2, and it's easy to talk to the coach. And then I had matches, particularly kind of the county, state, and national level, where I can't even think, let alone talk. I'm getting my butt handed to me.
I think that I was a little less dominant than you, and I think that's one of the reasons why I couldn't really talk back to my coach as much because I was struggling a lot of my matches. I was a little bit less technical. I went to the Penn State wrestling camps that you went to. I really did try, but I think that I should have focused more on wrestling than on the other sports that I focused on because I know how much I love those sports, how much I love the sport of wrestling and jiu-jitsu so much more than the sports I did. Not that I had wonderful coaches. I've talked with some of my previous teammates in the cross country and track world, but it doesn't matter how much you love your previous coaches. It's the sport.
Yeah, I concur. Now, on the flip side, so you were.
You sound like a scientist. I concur. On the flip side,
should have concurred. Oh, just so you know, ever since you said kung fu fighting, I have been singing that song in my head the entire time. So if I'm speaking in a cadence that everybody was kung fu fighting, I can't get it out of my head for like a half an hour now.
Those dudes were fast as lightning. No, okay, I'm gonna interrupt you. You ever grappled to a song?
Yep.
Oh my gosh, it's so fun. Because the thing is, I'll breathe to it.
Oh,
people have asked me. I'll go and I'll do.
That's what I do.
That's lightning. I actually the way you just breathed is the Gracie breathing technique. Have you ever looked this up?
I'm confident you've brought it up before, which means I've done some cursory looks at it, but never diving into it.
I think we as stupid nerds singing during grappling have learned something that the Gracies learned early on with grappling and performance, which was the Gracie breathing technique. And it involves with certain patterns of breathing, and I looked it up a while ago, so I'm not as into it right now because I was doing breath and power and strength training at some point, but now I'm into power and athleticism training. So you go on different focuses and tangents as you're training for different aspects of your game. But that adding of patterning and cadence to your breathing is one of the things that actually is a very complex oxygen management technique during high levels of performance. And I think that we did it kind of naturally as nerdy singers.
That's a good point. And I'm not sure, I'm going to have to look into that. I'm not sure that I would employ those techniques because apparently I'm already employing those techniques.
I think so.
So you had said something that you wish you had focused more on wrestling, right? Now, here I did wrestling as my primary sport. When the season was over, I was dying for it. But I did cross country and football and managed to become one of the captains of the teams, as you were. And what I think about when I go back to my high school years, I almost wish I would have done less of wrestling and more of the other sports to make myself a little bit more well-rounded. So here you are telling me you wish you had focused more on one sport, and I'm going, I wish I had focused a little less on that one sport. And again, I wouldn't really go back and change a thing, but I do think that maybe if I had focused a little bit more across the spectrum, it would have made me a little bit more well-rounded and less prone to injury.
I think that you're right about being less prone to injury, but I think that that's more on your end because the science was less there. I think now that the science is there, focusing on the one sport will allow you to cross-train properly in the weight room and outside of the weight room. for you, cross training and focusing less on the one sport would have decreased injury out of the nature of having a different movement set rather than directly, specifically addressing concerns. It would have, in a less scientific, more holistic way, addressed those concerns to the extent that the time period would have allowed. Because even now, with what I'm doing with clients is 10 years old, because what they currently have is ridiculous.
Right.
I've seen where they test out UFC fighters. They'll do jump off of this pad and they'll tell which portions of the extension of your leg when you're jumping are weak and train you in that. And they get extreme with some of these athletes, and the athletes aren't even making that much money until they get to the level of someone like Conor McGregor, Floyd Mayweather, and those are the people who took fullest exemplification of those techniques and are able to make the UFC enough money.
Yeah, I get it. And in terms of being injury free, I've never really had injuries. I broke my leg, broke a couple of ribs, tore my MCL.
Never injured.
Well, I guess what I consider to be injury prone are people that are constantly injured and or injured doing silly things. If you do BJJ at a high level, I think you're bound to have some injuries. I consider myself fairly bulletproof, even though leg, knee, ribs.
Difference is, again, your injuries are more of the catastrophic kind, which if you're you're hard-headed, when you started out, it's just a part of it. And I think that being a part of the nature of who you are will result in either more or less injuries. I think that my previous boss is less prone to injury, not necessarily out of an inherent he's about the same age as you, I think, a little bit younger, and not necessarily out of a inherent less injury per body part ratio. He's actually probably a little bit more mobile in a lot of areas and has some healthier connective tissue because of his training. You guys probably have about equal strength when looking raw muscle performance wise under, like, you go an EMG, probably raw muscle performance about equal.
Yeah.
But the thing is, his injury is less because of his mentality and the way he approaches. He taps quick and he taps very often. When you first were in blue belt, white belt, you didn't tap quick and you didn't tap often.
Right. It's a weird thing. So like when I think of your previous boss, I don't think I could move weights the way that he could move weights. So strength is a weird thing. On the mat, I felt stronger than him. I'm trying to be gentle, because I don't want to bruise anybody's egos.
You're a black belt and he's a blue belt.
Yeah.
You manhandle me and I'm a 25-year-old, who heavily scientifically trains myself specifically for this sport without even competition. So, your handling is like that. When the amount of years in the sport, your years in the sport is from the 70s, and now he's coming into it with less than 3 years experience, completely different level of capability in there. And again, you step into the gym and try to do the things he's doing.
I can't. Right, that's what I mean. So I look at what he does. I've seen what he does. I've seen what you do. I can't push weights as well as you guys by a long shot, but on the mat where strength is measured in different metrics.
It's measured in technique and the angles at which you can put another person's body, which forces their joints to not be able to move.
Yeah, no, you're definitely right. If I want to move your arm, I'm moving your head, and I'm going to change the strength that you have in your shoulder by moving your head. If I want to really break your grip, as soon as I get your arms over your shoulder, your elbows over the shoulders, your strength weakens. I can break your grip. So I'm using technique, but strength-wise, I couldn't push weights the way he can.
Well, I mean, what I'm talking it's so funny with the way, man, the respect I have for him as a trainer, with the things I've learned. Like some of those dynamic movement strength patterns have really altered the way I train. And my entire program has switched up. And I hate it because I had to learn a lot of new moves. But, I'm still trying to apply that. And I think I have like my next 3 programs are still implementing the changes that I developed through that. But, moving again into some talk about the impacts of training. I don't know why, but I don't feel weak up here. And I don't know if you noticed that about me. I feel like I can most of the time curl someone down to me. And I don't know if I am a little bit disproportionately strong in my back, but I don't know what your sense of that is, because I feel like I give people a lot of people a hugely tough time here because I can almost just pull my arm down. I hate doing it because it's not technique, but for me, it's technique.
Well, so this is a weird conversation, and it's a couple of parts to it. When I grapple you, I do find that your strength exists through a big range of motions. So with you, I have to tighten my technique up to break that grip or to get the arm. So it's a technique issue. But your strength through range of motion is amongst the best that I go with. Most people, as soon as I get their elbows away from their body up toward their shoulder, they're like a child. And I get you up in here and I get you up in here and you still have a lot of strength to pull back. So
I was wondering if that was just me feeling like that, or like, I don't know. And I don't know what I do differently to make that happen. And that's me trying to go through and figure that out for people. If it's controlled pull-ups, if it's combining controlled pull-ups with rows, because it's something I've had for a long time, since before I even really implemented the new techniques that I've learned. And now I feel it's only getting better to the point where I do feel like there are people that are a lot better than me that I'm just pushing their body down with my lat. And I don't know how. And I hate, it sounds a little bit egoistic, but I want to get people's backs stronger. I know how to strengthen people's legs. I know how to, and this shoulder joint, similar to the hip joints, very, very complex joints.
So I remember when I was really young, and I mean, even through high school, college, Papa had the grip of a gorilla. And you could take any pipe and he could hold it with one hand, and you could take your 2 hands and you couldn't turn that pipe in his hand. Doesn't matter how much you try, or even get the pipe out of his hand. So he had this weird Royland gorilla grip strength. The reason I bring that up, so you have this weird strength through motion, which I don't
of my specifically
particularly shoulders. Yeah, particularly your upper body, shoulders. I remember a long time ago, I'm grappling with somebody. I don't remember who it was, doesn't matter. And Sensei Matt Serra came over, and the bigger guy that I'm grappling with, must have been 200 and something pounds, was kind of keeping his hands on the floor. And Matt said to him, "Put your weight on him." And he went, "Oh, but Matt, he's 140 pounds. I'm 250. And Matt went, "All right, so just hear me out for a second. So do you think that Glenn, that Doc, is going to slow himself down in the scramble because you're slower than him?" He went, "No." He goes, "Well, then why wouldn't you use your advantage? Your advantage is your size over him. I'm not telling you to kill the guy, but I'm telling you, use the equipment and the advantages that you have," right? And it was a really important learning experience for me too, in that I now understood I have a certain set of skill set developed over the course of many years. I have a certain set of skills that I need to take advantage of. And Matt, this gentleman, whoever it was I was grappling with, has a certain skills that he needs to take advantage of. And you shouldn't cripple yourself by negating those skills, right? So you happen to have strength through motion. Doesn't matter where your arms are, you're particularly strong. Why wouldn't you use that advantage? You don't want to cripple yourself. You use the advantages that you have.
I think you're right. My question wasn't to use or not to use. That was not the question. The question was,
how nobler to suffer the sins and sorrows of the
sorrows of the question was more, what difference can I help people develop? Because if it's not just me. I know that Papa would probably tell you that just whatever, it's me. there's a way that you could train that. I think that is probably mostly gymnastics training.
Yeah.
And I think that for me, it might be wrestling training, but I don't think so because I feel like there are wrestlers I go against that don't have that level of strength up here. And I think that this is one of the biggest ways that people get choked is not being able to keep their arms down. And I think that could help a lot of people is, first of all, what would you recommend as a technique to get away from here because most people are weak here, you know? Right. And then because I think that my biggest thought process of how I get people is by getting their arm here and then I tap them here, because their elbow's up, or choke. I'm not as good at choking, but most of my taps are here, and most of all taps are involving the arm in this place.
Yeah. So it's interesting. It's almost like a chip off the old block. I do that a lot. And what I tend to do, as you probably know, is I'll try to isolate an arm, and I'll actually use the entire core almost like a side crunch. Instead of trying to beat your strength with my strength, I use my entire body to separate your arm from your body. And I get a lot of people's arms. So I see where you're coming from. One of the things that I always tell people is to be super cognizant of your elbow placement. And, you know, elbows, again, in jiu-jitsu, we're not talking street fighting. We're talking competitive jiu-jitsu. The minute your elbows start to separate and you now have a gap, I can easily or relatively easily start to leverage that arm and isolate the arm. So your elbow placement's critical, underhooks, critical. As soon as you start to get up in this area, obviously the arms get weak. So I tell people to really be cognizant of their placement of the arm, particularly if I'm in side control, the arm on the opposite side of side control. So if I'm on your side here, that's the arm I'm going to attack. Your best bet is to get up on your hip, get up on your side, not to lay flat on your back. Keep that elbow in, fight for that underhook, and protect that arm.
You know, it's funny. I actually use this side as a, like, if I'm in side control and I use this side as a distractor so I can go for this arm. So and I know this is a blue belt talking to a black belt here, but what I'll do is I'll come in from side control, get an under over here, bring my elbow up and around like I'm trying to separate your elbow, and then this arm slides underneath as you're fighting this elbow, captures your wrist, presses your wrist down, and I end up flipping over your head to the other side. Yeah. And I gift wrap up on that side, and I'm able to separate the other elbow. And maybe we can demonstrate that later, like so I can show you what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I do that as well. But I'd say if I take your elbow 10 times, I'm going to say 8 to 9 of those times, it's the elbow opposite or your arm opposite the side that I'm on. And then I'll say the other 1 to 2 times, I've used it as either distraction. And as you come in to defend that arm, I'll then either go for an arm bar or come around your head. Yeah. But I'll say, and I think most of the people that grapple with me will agree, I'll pin this arm down under my legs and I'll fight for the forearm and I'll get the forearm.
That's very common. I like the pinning down under the legs as well. That's something that took me a while to figure out. And I think a lot of people need to use their legs a little bit more as true usable appendages. You know, that's something that is ignored. And it's almost like people feel the need, defend your legs from leg attacks, and then let's see what else we can do with my arms. You have to use, I don't know if this is allowed, but I grip people's gis with my feet. Do you actually, have you ever done that where you actually take someone's gi, grip their gi with your feet and use it?
I'm not a monkey. No, I wouldn't say that I've gripped people's gis like that, but I have had situations where my foot will go in under the backside of the gi, kind of in their belt, and I'll use my leg to push with their gi to get separation if I'm on the bottom to get my other leg in. So I've used foot in the gi. I pummel my legs a lot more, I think, than some people. So I will use my legs to pummel in, and I do think I use my feet more frequently. And I'm very cognizant of foot placement because I want to avoid being pulled back into your guard or pulled back into half guard.
That's something you're really good at, is the foot pummeling. And one of the things that you've shown me was the foot pummeling, but also placing the foot on the hip as you're pulling guard. A couple of those different things that really help you not to have to force a flying guard or too speedy of a pull without control. It's interesting to me that, I would think that you'd be someone who would legitimately grip a gi, because if the person's gi is properly fitted, and maybe you try it, because I'm surprised that that's not something you've either thought of or done, because I've actually been able to avoid people getting around me by gripping their gi with my foot and pulling a combination of them back and me around, using my foot gripping their gi on the front. And it's very interesting, and I make sure that I practice nerve flossing, but also while I'm nerve flossing, I extend and open my toes and then close my toes and then complete the floss so that I can get full activation of all the motor units in my leg and full development of the muscles in my toe. And then I'm not forcing myself to wrap my toes inside of their gi cuffs or anything, so that there's no risk of injury. And I've never had anybody describe that as an illegal technique. So you can use your hands. Why not be able to use your toes?
Yeah, it's a funny thing. Sometimes when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So you have one tool and you try to use that tool. And I think I'm guilty of falling into that, where I have my skill set, and as an old dog, it's harder to teach new tricks. I try to open myself up to new tricks, but I find, I'll do them when drilling or when flow rolling, but when the stuff hits the fan, so to speak, I go back into my toolbox of familiar tools. So it's a little harder for me to incorporate new tools into a live match. And so
more so, it wasn't me saying to incorporate it, but whether or not that's a move that you could see as being a valid move, and or do you think that's legal in competition to grab someone's thigh with your toes and use that as a grip if you have the grip in your feet? And I know that sounds weird, but a forearm training program, I have very specific programs for this stuff. I have a supplementation regime having very specific stimulants before matches. It's going to be highest level, so that I can tell people, hey, listen, I was never, national champion, but I trained myself as if I was a national champion, and this is what I did.
Yeah, so backing up, I think it's legal. There's nothing I could think of that would make that illegal. I mean, if you took your foot, wrapped it up in their gi, and had a wrap, that they're going to undo. But I sure hope you let me corner you again.
It's going to be a little bit interesting now that I've developed into a blue belt, and I've got some of these little tricks that I've figured out, and I kind of have honed in on that one because I've never seen people use it, and it's surprised a couple people recently, because it's not something you think is going to happen. Some new techniques that I've been working on, heel hooks specifically, which makes me a little more confident to go into no-gi. And I would love to be cornered by you. And
no pressure. I wasn't trying.
No. I'm just trying to think about any other questions that we could go into, because I want to make sure that I can get the fullest out of this conversation. It's not very often you get a top 1% in any field to talk to. And if you look at the jiu-jitsu percentages of people who actually get to black belt, it is less than 1%. It is a significantly lower percentage than 1%. And I know you're my father, but it's hard to get a time to sit down and talk when you're going to have a quiet house and you're going to have a couple of hours.
Yeah, so you bring up like top 1%, and I've had a lot of people, particularly white belts, that will ask. I think I'm pretty approachable, but they'll ask me, how do you do it? And I say, well, a couple things. First thing is you make a decision once to go to the academy, right? And early on, I think I had that conversation with you. If you wake up every day and go, am I going to go today? Not going to go today? You're making a decision 7 days a week. And that's exhausting mentally. You make a decision once and then you go. And of course, life brings with it a series of calamities and mishaps, and you might not be able to go on a Tuesday or a Thursday. But instead of making a decision, am I going or not, you're making a decision to back out, whereas you've made a decision, you're going to go. So you make a decision once. Number two, the only metric you have is against yourself. Because if you start measuring yourself against other people, even amongst black belts, see, black belt's the trickiest belt, right? When I go against a blue belt, I know that they're probably training a couple of years. You go against a black belt, they could be training 30 years. They could be a black belt for 20 years. They could be a black belt for 1 year. They could be a black belt for 4 years. So black belt has probably the biggest degrees of separation, where your low black belts that are only a brand new black belt are going to be nowhere near as good as your 5, 10, 15-year black belts. But you don't have a 5, 10, or 15-year blue belt, right? So black belts are the trickiest.
Well, actually, I met a 10-year blue belt recently.
Yeah.
And it was more because of the calamities. It told me some of his story. So it was more because of gaps in training.
Right.
And not that he didn't want to, but some things suck. But I get what you mean there. His consecutive training time was about the same amount of time as you're saying right now. But yeah, you do have literal time 10-year blue belts. Like you said, that decision, that initial decision, I've told that to a lot of people, and a lot of people have liked that, which is you make the decision once. I think that's one of the most valuable pieces of advice I've gotten in my life. And it's what's got me into jiu-jitsu 3 days a week, sometimes 4 days a week, depending upon the week, because at the beginning of the week, it's the new week of 3 days a week. I don't care if it's Monday, Thursday, Friday. I don't care if it's Monday, Tuesday, Thursday. I know that if it hits Thursday, it's going to be Friday, Saturday, Sunday. It's going to be Friday, Saturday, Sunday. I'm going to be freaking tired on Monday.
Yeah.
But I know that there's always going to be that 3 days.
Right. And that's the thing. So you've made the decision once. Your metric is yourself. You take it slow. I used to do 2 days, 2 in a day. Probably not the smartest to do that regularly, but you take it slow. And I think a big key for me, if you go to a class, that instructor is going to probably show you 3 or 4 things, fill in the blank, a move, an escape, 3 or 4 things. Your goal is to leave with a couple of those. You don't need to leave with all of it. So you go in, you pay attention to 1 or 2 or 3 things, either something you go, oh, I've never seen that before. That's the thing you want to grab onto. So you don't need to grab onto the entirety of the lesson. You grab onto a couple of gems. Maybe it's 3 gems. And if he's gone over 6 things, it's only half of what he did, but you're not stressing yourself physically, emotionally, spiritually. So you make one decision, you go consistently. Metric is yourself and nobody else.
Yeah.
And pick up a couple of things. And don't be belt. Don't be belt oriented. When you get the blue belt,
I only get melt oriented.
When you get the blue belt, you should almost feel like you don't deserve it. You should feel like your quest isn't quite there yet. At least that's my personal take on it. You should feel proud, man. Oh my God. When Matt Serra awards me a belt, man, there's nothing greater on the planet, right? I mean, having kids was pretty good.
I have those same feelings where I still wish I was a white belt, because the fact that there are blue belts that beat me makes me feel not like a blue belt,
Yeah, I get that. I had a purple belt catch me within the last month. And the weird thing is he actually apologized to me. He said, I'm sorry. I said, for what?
No.
He goes, I just feel like, feel like what? I had this big smile. You can ask. I had this big smile on my face when he tapped, and I, going for the next round, and of course, that I make sure I get a nice choke. But I've had a purple belt recently catch me. So there shouldn't be pride in other blue belts beating you.
Well, again, and it's not like I get frustrated. It's more that I don't feel like a blue belt. I feel like I should be able to beat all the blue belts to be a blue belt. And I feel like I should be able to beat all the purple belts to be a purple belt. And it isn't that way necessarily, but you're right about that. And I think some people take the wrong attitude towards it, and I have a tough time with that. But
I think of it this way. I'm pretty sure that he went home and was so happy, right? I made his day, right? He probably went home and I tapped out a black belt.
I know I did when I tapped my first black belt, and it was a fluke. It was a fluke, and I knew it was a fluke at the time. And it's okay, because I knew it was a fluke, and I was all right with that.
Right, and this was a fluke, right position. My position was wrong position. I tap him routinely. It's not. It was a fluke, but I felt so happy for him. How happy was he that he was able to go home and know that he pulled off that move, and his technique was good enough that I wasn't going to escape it. And it he made his day, right?
Yeah. And again, the same thing happened to me. black belt started going with me again, I immediately got tapped. It's
Right,
just how it is. You know, you gotta be shown like, hey, you got it, but it was a catch. Anything else?
No, I say you pick your journey and make the one-time decision and stick to it.
All right. Have a nice day. Stay happy, healthy, and safe. And like, comment, subscribe. Enjoy the YouTube channel and check out Instagram, Sweatshirt Fitness. Sweatshirtfitness.com for personal training plans, programming, or online or in-person personal training. Book now.